This is an English-language bibliography of United States Virgin Islands and its geography, history, inhabitants, culture, biota, etc. Acevedo-Rodriguez, Pedro, Flora of St.John U.S. Virgin Islands. Acevedo-Rodriguez, Pedro, Vines and Climbing Plants of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Acevedo-Rodriguez, Pedro and Mark T. Strong, Monocotyledons and Gymnosperms of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Ackerman, James D. An Orchid Flora of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Alexander, Robert J. Political Parties of the Americas, Canada, Latin America, and the West Indies. 2 vols. Anguilla, Grenada and Guadeloupe, Virgin Islands of the United States. Armstrong, Douglas v. Creole Transformation from Slavery to Freedom, Historical Archaeology of the East End Community, St. John, Virgin Islands. Beatty, Harry A. Birds of St. Croix, Boyer, William W. America's Virgin Islands, A History of Human Rights and Wrongs. Chipman, Walter A. and Paulie Thompson, Possibilities for Oyster Culture in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Cochrane, Hamilton, These of the Virgin Islands. Cohen, Judah M. Through the Sands of Time, A History of the Jewish Community of St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. Colon, Julio C. Figueroa of the Scientific Survey of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, an 80-year reassessment of the island's natural history. Comstock, William Phillips, Insects of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, Lepidoptera rhopalacera, Papilionoidea, Hesperioidea, Scientific Survey of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, Volume 12, Part 4. Crocker, John, Bermuda, the Bahamas, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Danforth, Stuart T. Bird Records from the Virgin Islands. D. Bouet, Theodore and John T. Farris, The Virgin Islands, Our New Possessions and the British Islands. Edie, Hazel Balance, Lagoon in the Virgin Islands. Evans, Luther H. The Virgin Islands. Evans, Luther Harris, The Virgin Islands, From Naval Base to New Deal. Gable, Eric, A Guide to Sources for the History of the Danish West Indies, 1671–1917. Harrigan, Norwell, The Inter-Virgin Islands Conference, A Study of a Microstate International Organization. Henry, Marguerite, Virgin Islands, In Story and Pictures, a children's picture book illustrated by Kurt Wieser. Hibben, Thomas and Raphael Pico, Industrial Development of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands of the United States. Report of the United States Section, Caribbean Commission, July 1948. Highfield, Arnold R. The French Dialect of St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, A Descriptive Grammar with Texts and Glossary. Howitz, Emmanuel, Julius Menaker and Ward Weldon, Educational Imperialism, American School Policy and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Jarvis, J. Antonio, Brief History of the Virgin Islands. Jarvis, J. Antonio, The Virgin Islands and the People. Leopold, N. F. Checklist of Birds of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Louis Gordon K. The Virgin Islands, A Caribbean Lilliput. Little, Elbert L. Jr. and Frank H. Wadsworth, Commentaries of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Little, E. L. Jr. R.O. Woodbury, and F. H. Wadsworth, Trees of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Little, Elbert L. Jr., Roy O. Woodbury, and Frank H. Wadsworth, Trees of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, Volume 2. McGuire, J. W. Geographic Dictionary of the Virgin Islands of the United States. Meyerhoff, H. A. The Physiography of the Virgin Islands, Culebra and VX. Miskimin, George W. and Richard M. Bond, Insect Fauna of St. Croix, United States Virgin Islands. Nichols, Robert W. Old Time Masquerading in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Peuanski, Michael, Conquest of Eden, 1493–1515, Other Voyages of Columbus, Guadalupe, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, Virgin Islands. Proctor, George R. Ferns of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Raphael Herbert A Field Guide to the Birds of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Raphael Herbert A Guide to the Birds of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Rec Daisy, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Savage, Ernest A. The Libraries of Bermuda, the Bahamas, the British West Indies, British Guiana, British Honduras, Puerto Rico, and the American Virgin Islands. A report to the Carnegie Corporation of New York. Stevenson, John A. Funky of Puerto Rico and the American Virgin Islands. Svensson, Ole, Three Towns, Conservation and Renewal of Charlotte Amalia, Christiansted, and Frederiksted of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Weinstein, Edwin A. Cultural Aspects of Delusion, A Psychiatric Study of the Virgin Islands. Wetmore, Alexander, Scientific Survey of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Volume 9 Part 3, The Birds of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, Columbiformes to Columbiformes. Wetmore, Alexander, Scientific Survey of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Volume 9 Part 4, Psittaciformes to Passeriformes. Zabriskie, Luther K. The Virgin Islands of the United States of America.